Comprehensive Study Guide, The Path to Instantaneous Enlightenment. This study guide is based on the teachings of Sri Bhagavath as presented in the texts Don't Delay Enlightenment and Secret of Enlightenment. It explores the psychological structure of the mind, the nature of spiritual liberation, and the distinction between intellectual understanding and spiritual practice. Part I. Short Answer Quiz Instructions. Answer the following questions in 2-3 sentences based on the provided source context. 1. How does the author define the relationship between spiritual practice and enlightenment? The author states that there is no causal connection between spiritual practices and enlightenment, as practices only result in temporary experiences. While practices can prepare an aspirant for enlightenment, the state itself is attained solely through the way of understanding. 2. According to the text, why is enlightenment described as an intellectual process? Enlightenment is considered intellectual because it relies on clarity of thought and the understanding of what enlightenment is, rather than a physical or mystical achievement. The text asserts that the intelligence required to understand an ordinary storybook is sufficient to grasp the intellectual clarity needed for enlightenment. 3. What is the inner war described in the source? The inner war is the conflict between the conscious mind, which follows a theory of perfection, and the subconscious mind, which produces feelings like anger or sorrow automatically. This struggle occurs because the conscious mind tries to control or alter the subconscious expressions it deems bad, creating a cycle of resistance. 4. What is the theory of perfection? The theory of perfection consists of ideas formulated from scriptures and noble persons about how one should behave, such as being always loving or patient. This theory acts as an obstacle because it causes the conscious mind to reject actual feelings, thereby reinforcing the very states it seeks to eliminate. 5. Explain the difference between the possessor and the flower. The possessor is the I consciousness that attaches itself to feelings by demanding future states, such as wanting to retain pleasure or remove sorrow. A flower is a personality that has dissolved this demand, allowing all consciousness to flow naturally without personal responsibility or interference. 6. How does the text define Maya? Maya is the doctrine that the world we perceive is not the object itself, but rather a sensory disturbance or perception created by our own organs. Because we impose our opinions and thoughts on what we see, we are essentially seeing ourselves and our own mental impositions rather than an external reality. 7. What are the 4 prerequisites for a spiritual aspirant to attain enlightenment? An aspirant must have an earnest interest in spiritual life, a basic familiarity with spiritual literature, and an open mind to accept reasonable ideas. Additionally, the seeker must reject the pessimistic notion that enlightenment is unattainable within their current lifespan. 8. What is discriminatory vision, and why is it considered the state of ignorance? Discriminatory vision is the 3rd layer of perception, where an individual uses likes and dislikes to divide experiences into wanted and unwanted. It is considered ignorance because it creates contradictions and bondage through the act of trying to possess specific results or feelings. 9. Why does the author claim that mental feelings are actually physical feelings? The author argues that every mental feeling, such as fear or joy, causes a chemical change and vibration in the nervous system. Since a feeling must have a bodily expression to be recognized as a feeling, there is no basic difference between physical and mental consciousness. 10. What is the significance of the gap in the context of the 3 visions? The gap represents the transition time between sensory perception, mental recognition, and discriminatory judgment. While these 3 visions often happen so quickly they appear simultaneous, recognizing the gap allows one to see how the mind moves from pure, innocent observation to rigid, violent possession. Part 2. Answer Key 1. Relationship. Practices lead to temporary experiences. Enlightenment is a permanent state reached only through understanding. There is no direct link between the two. 2. Intellectual process. Clarity of thought is the catalyst. Ordinary intelligence is enough to realize the truth of enlightenment. 3. Inner war. Conflict between the conscious mind's ideals and the subconscious mind's automatic, natural responses. 4. Theory of perfection. a mental list of good versus bad behaviors that causes the mind to resist its own natural flow. 5. Possessor versus flower. The possessor demands future changes to current feelings. The flower allows feelings to pass through without attachment. 6. Maya. The world is a reflection of our own sensory disturbances and mental impositions rather than a separate reality. 7. Prerequisites. Earnestness, basic spiritual knowledge, an open mind, lack of adamant conclusions, and optimism regarding attainment. 8. Discriminatory vision. The layer of mind that categorizes by likes, dislikes. It is ignorance because it creates the possessor and psychological struggle. 9. Physicality of feelings. Mental feelings are physical because they manifest as chemical changes and nervous system vibrations. Without bodily expression, they do not exist. 10. The gap, the momentary space between levels of vision. Understanding this prevents the third vision, ignorance, from dominating the first two, truth, intellect. Part 3. Essay questions instructions. Use the provided source context to develop comprehensive responses to the following prompts. 1. The fallacy of effort. Discuss the author's argument that effort and spiritual practice can actually hinder enlightenment. How does the demand for the future create a cycle of bondage? 2. The mechanics of liberation. Analyze the concept of allowing everything to flow. How does this transition the mind from a state of self-contradiction to a state of legitimate irresponsibility? 3. The three visions of perception. Compare and contrast sensory vision, mental vision, and discriminatory vision. Explain how the dominance of the third vision leads to human misery, and how stabilizing in the first vision offers a path out of ignorance. 4. Consciousness and the body. Explore the author's view that all consciousness is effectively body consciousness. What implications does this have for those seeking divine or heavenly experiences through meditation? 5. Enlightenment versus purification. The text suggests that purification dawns only on our liberation, rather than the other way around. Explain the analogy of the train tracks and why the author believes seeking character perfection before enlightenment is a wrong approach. Part 4. Glossary of key terms. Term definition. Atman, the real being beyond the body and mind, described as pure, self-illumining, and always safe. Conscious mind. C.M. The day-to-day mind, consisting of current feelings and experiences. The functional mind that plans and acts in the world. Subconscious mind. SCM. The storehouse of mental attitudes, genetic inheritance, and knowledge. It produces conscious experiences automatically. Deeper conscious mind. DCM. A secret chamber within the mind that can be activated to produce occult powers or spiritual trance states. Discriminatory vision. The third layer of vision characterized by likes, dislikes, and the attempt to possess or reject specific outcomes. Floyer, a personality or state of being where one allows all thoughts and feelings to flow naturally without taking personal responsibility for them. Gnana, the understanding of one's real nature as Atman, the knowledge of what enlightenment truly is. Maya, the doctrine that the perceived world is unreal or an illusion created by sensory disturbances and mental impositions. Mayporol, the supreme truth, or godliness, described as a core, inert, dense, and infinite feeling centered within every individual. Mental vision, the second layer of vision, where the intellect identifies, names, and recognizes objects perceived by the senses. Possessor the I, consciousness, when it attaches to feelings through a demand for a specific future state, e.g., wanting to stay happy or stop being sad. Sensory vision, the first and most basic layer of vision, a pure, innocent, and independent scanning of the world through the sensory organs. Theory of perfection, a set of rigid intellectual conclusions about good and bad that causes the conscious mind to fight the subconscious mind.